In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. I think that's a Jean-Claude Van Damme quote, if I remember correctly. I learned all kinds of things when I first started writing. A lot of what I thought I understood about writing a novel turned out to be complete BS. So let's talk about a few of those things today. Here are 5 things that beginners get wrong about writing a novel. Thing number 1, your idea is actually important, or the most important thing. The true skill of a writer is about making a reader feel strong emotions from a generic story, not about coming up with amazing ideas for that story. Almost anyone can think of an emotionally impactful climax to a story. It's very easy to add the emotions that you feel about the characters and the world into a story when you're thinking about a story. Now, making someone else, the reader, feel the same way that you do about a story, all the buildup that goes into making the characters work and the setting feel right, that's where things get difficult. The main challenge in writing is not coming up with ideas, it's communicating those ideas to the reader. The execution of an idea, therefore, matters far more than the idea itself. Yes, the idea matters, but if you don't have the skill or the ability, or if the execution doesn't properly communicate that to the reader, then it's not going to matter. Engaging writing that's rich in sensory details with nicely polished prose will elevate even a generic seeming idea. On the other hand, really poor writing that executes on what could be considered a really interesting idea will almost always never work. Do you know what's probably a good idea? Subscribing to my channel, because you'll get more writing advice videos like this multiple times every week. Next up, thing number 2 that beginners get wrong about writing a novel: the idea that novels have a lot of room. When you're a beginner, writing a story the length of a novel can be daunting. And honestly, once you're no longer a beginner, it still can be quite daunting. I mean, we're talking about 80 to 100,000 words of prose. That's a lot of words. People talk about how hard it is to get meaning across on a short medium like Twitter or in flash fiction, but we really should be having the same conversations about novels. A novel is not just about telling a longer story, it's about telling a bigger story. The constraints that you have in the length of a novel are as constraining as the lengths that you have in flash fiction. It's like a cargo ship is bigger than a canoe in that it can carry more cargo, but if you put a canoe's worth of cargo in a cargo ship, that's a waste of a cargo ship. But at the same time, a cargo ship is still a finite space, and if you want to make the most of it, you can't try to fit 2 cargo ships worth of cargo in there. The story that you tell needs to fit the length of the medium. If your story is too short, you'll end up with a novel that has a lot of fluff. It will likely have a very saggy middle, and the story will drag. On the other hand, if you try to tell too big of a story in a novel, it might feel rushed and underdeveloped. It may be super complex at the expense of depth. Just because a novel is a longer medium does not mean you have time to waste. Every page counts. Every page needs to contribute in some way. Your story needs to fit into the length of a novel, not be too small or too big. Next up, thing number 3 that beginners get wrong about writing a novel: improving a novel, or your writing in general, does not feel good. Making a novel better often doesn't feel good. It's not a super enjoyable process at times. Whether it's fiddling with the plot or working through the prose, revision, trying to edit and improve a novel can be an exhausting process. Yes, once it's done, you'll feel good and you can look back and see all the improvement and hopefully have something that you can be proud of, but the process of getting there often doesn't feel that great. In order to improve a novel, you have to spend a lot of time focused on the weakest parts of it. The scenes that are still boring, the characters that people don't really seem to like, the paragraphs that are awkward, the sentences that just don't sound that great. Like the last sentence I just flubbed. The stuff that you're happy with, the scenes you really like, the characters that everyone seems to love, those don't need your attention. Sure, there is some value in working to make that stuff better, but most of your efforts need to go towards what's dragging down the novel. That means you're going to be working on the boringest scenes, or the characters you like the least, or the prose that needs the most fleshing out. Doing the right thing often feels really crappy. Doing the wrong thing usually feels comfortable and good. This is something that screws people over in many aspects of life, novel writing included. The right direction to move is often uphill, and that's also the hardest direction to move in. Getting better often means feeling bad. You can feel good about getting better, but the process of getting there often feels bad. Next up, thing number 4, your writing should be predictable. I think if you just polled random readers, they would say that they don't like predictable stories. But if you look at the stories people actually like, I think you'll find that a lot of them have a level of predictability to them. Twists that come out of nowhere and make no sense given the rest of the story, or endings that violate the established rules of a world, are usually recipes for disaster, storytelling wise. Good novels use things like foreshadowing to establish the direction that a story is going. They drop hints to the reader about what's going to happen later on in the story. A good story is like a puzzle where the image only makes sense when the reader sticks that last piece into place. You are giving the reader all the pieces of the story, but what those pieces end up making isn't necessarily clear to the end. Good stories are often retroactively predictable. They become predictable. The reader starts to see the clues and the evidence and things that have been dropped throughout the story once they get to the ending, once they have that final piece in place. If you write characters that have solid goals and motivations which they follow and are consistent with, if you create rules in your world that make sense and that you stick to, then a lot of this stuff will take care of itself. And lastly, thing number 5 that people get wrong about writing a novel, the novel you start with is not going to be the novel you'll finish with. Writing a novel is a long process, and any story is going to evolve to an extent over the course of that process. Sometimes a side character ends up being more interesting than a main character. Sometimes a part of the setting doesn't work. Sometimes the plot you thought would offer a lot of depth ends up being pretty shallow. You want to make sure at any point in the process that you are open to new directions to take for your story. But you have to balance this with not just chasing shiny objects. Exciting, new, fresh ideas are always going to tempt you as you work through your novel, and making the decision as to whether to go in a different direction can be challenging, especially if you're a beginner. There's a balance between needing to find something better because something isn't working and you just becoming familiar with something that's actually good. If you've reread a scene 5 or 6 or 10 times, it might be getting boring. You might have the desire to change it up, but to somebody reading the novel, it still might be fresh. You are going to have a constant struggle with this of figuring out, is something good enough or should I change it? A novel is going to go through a lot of changes to the point where it might be very different from what you started with. But you can't just constantly be chasing the shiny object or you're never going to finish your project. Just like this video is, well, it's not never going to be finished because we're finishing it now. Anyway, so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. Please leave a comment down below if you have any thoughts on what was shared today. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.